What's one moment that made you go, that's it, I'm done?
Easter at my mother's house has always felt like a carefully staged play, one of those low-budget church performances where everyone already knows their lines, and God help you if you try to improvise. The house smells of glazed ham and over-perfumed lilies, the table's been set since morning, and Mom hurries from room to room like a cruise ship director who still believes this trip is going somewhere meaningful. Everyone shows up with their store-bought pies, their too-tight smiles, and their same old stories, pretending we haven't heard it all before. I usually keep quiet through most of it, not because I don't have anything to say, but because saying it would just ruin the damn casserole. That year, like most others, I got there early. I helped set the table, folded the cloth napkins in those stupid fan shapes Mom loves, uncorked the wine, and made sure the kids had juice boxes and not my Cabernet. Carla breezed in around 2:30 with her husband and their two boys, both already sugared up and carrying plastic eggs from the church hunt like war trophies. She barely looked at me when she came in, which wasn't unusual. We've had this unspoken rule since we were teenagers. We exist in the same space, but not in the same world. She lives in the one where things work out, where people love you loudly and often, where the worst things that happen are still pretty manageable. I live in the space just outside the light, not bitter, not broken, just permanently underestimated. Dinner was what it always was. Ham, scalloped potatoes, overcooked green beans with those crunchy onions on top, and a side of conversation so shallow you could drown in it if you tried hard enough. Mom asked Carla about the school district, the boys, the committee at church. Carla had answers for everything like she always does. I passed the butter, refilled wine glasses, made sure no one noticed that Mom forgot to heat the rolls. No one asked me about my job or my life or anything else beyond whether I'd seen the weather forecast. I smiled. I nodded. I laughed when it was appropriate. And I waited. Because I knew she was going to do it again. Just as everyone was finishing up and the wine had done its job softening edges, Mom stood up. She tapped her glass with a spoon like it was a wedding toast, and in that moment, my stomach tightened the way it always did when I could feel something coming, something I couldn't stop, only endure. She cleared her throat and looked straight at Carla, her voice already trembling with emotion before a single word left her lips. I just want to say, she began, smiling as her hand landed gently on Carla's shoulder, how truly lucky I feel. To have a daughter like you. You're such a wonderful mother, and the way you take care of everyone, the way you've handled everything, it just fills my heart. She looked around the table, fishing for agreement. I honestly don't know where this family would be without Carla. Everyone murmured, nodded. Uncle Dave clapped once too loud. Carla gave one of those tight, modest smiles, but her eyes glittered with satisfaction. I didn't look at her. I looked at my wine glass, then at Mom, who never even glanced in my direction. She sat back down like she'd just handed out an award, proud of her speech, of her daughter, of the little family narrative she'd just reinforced. I stood up quietly and grabbed the empty plates. Cleared the table like a waitress who knew better than to interrupt the customers. Went to the kitchen, washed dishes in silence while Carla helped the kids with pie. I came back, refilled glasses, smiled again. And not one person noticed that my hands were shaking. You'd think a moment like that, a public erasure, would make someone shout, cry, throw something. But I didn't feel rage. Not yet. What I felt was something colder, quieter. A clicking into place, like the last piece of a puzzle you've stared at for years, finally finding where it belongs. When I got home that night, I didn't cry. I didn't even drink. I just sat at my kitchen table, stared at the wall, and remembered. Not just the speech, but all the others before it. All the Easters, Thanksgivings, birthdays where Carla was the strong one, the good one, the one who held it all together. And I thought about how many times I'd let it slide. How many times I'd swallowed it down like bad wine. So I got up, went to my bedroom closet, and pulled out the box I hadn't opened in years. It was heavy, lined with photographs, old letters, pieces of things I wasn't supposed to keep. I dug until I found the one I needed, a picture from our dad's funeral. Carla wasn't in it. She'd been on vacation with her boyfriend that week, said she couldn't get a flight in time. She sent flowers and a note, so sorry. Love you. But she didn't show up. I scanned it, cropped it, and sent it to her phone with no explanation. Just the image. She texted me back 10 minutes later. Why are you sending me that? I stared at the screen for a while before replying. Just wondering if you still remember where you were that day. She didn't respond. But I know she saw it. And I know it made her uncomfortable. Which is the first time in a long, long while that anything I did made them feel anything at all. There's a certain kind of quiet that creeps in when a woman gets used to being ignored, not the peaceful kind, not the kind you earn after a long day and a glass of wine, but the bitter, echoing kind that follows you into rooms where your name isn't mentioned and your presence is treated like a lamp in the corner, useful, unremarkable, and ultimately replaceable. That was the quiet I sat with the night after Easter, long after Carla stopped responding to my message, long after the memory of Mom's speech stopped replaying in my head like a scratched-up cassette. It was the same quiet I'd known since I was 12 and first started realizing that in our family, attention wasn't given, it was won, and if you weren't born with the right glow, the right timing, the right kind of lovable story, you'd better learn to shrink yourself down and stay out of the way. When we were kids, Carla could have burned the house down and they would have blamed the matches, not her. I remember this one afternoon so vividly it still stings. I was probably 11, maybe 12, and we were home alone for a couple of hours while Mom ran errands. Carla decided it would be fun to paint the hallway wall with nail polish, a mural of flowers, hearts, her name in sparkly letters, and when Mom came home and smelled the fumes, she screamed loud enough to shake the light fixture in the kitchen. But instead of asking who did it, she marched into my room and demanded to know why I hadn't stopped her sister from acting like a little delinquent. I opened my mouth to explain that I hadn't even been upstairs, that I didn't know anything until she came back, but she cut me off with that look she always used, that tight-lipped, eyes-narrowed glare that said, "Don't you dare try to play the victim here, young lady." She grounded me for 3 days. Took away my books, the only escape I had in that house, and told me I needed to learn to be more responsible. Carla didn't get grounded. She didn't even get yelled at. Later that night, I overheard Mom telling her, in that soft, indulgent tone, that she understood how creative minds need an outlet. It wasn't the punishment that hurt, I could have lived with that. It was the way she looked at me, like I was the problem, like I was always the one making things more complicated than they needed to be. That look followed me for decades, long after the nail polish incident, long after our dad died, long after I stopped asking to be included in anything that mattered. That Monday after Easter, I asked Uncle Dave to meet me for lunch at the diner near the highway, the one with the burnt coffee and the yellow booths that always smelled faintly of bleach and fried onions. I told him I wanted to catch up, that I hadn't seen him properly in ages, which was technically true. But the real reason was a little seed that had started to grow in the back of my mind, a seed planted by something he once told me, years ago, when he'd had too much gin at Thanksgiving and was trying to bond. We were halfway through our plates, he was rambling about some neighbor's divorce, and I was politely nodding when I leaned in and asked, casually but carefully, "Do you remember those weekends Mom used to be gone? When we were kids?" His face changed instantly. The lazy smile dropped. His hand froze mid-cut into a sandwich. "You mean when she said she was at women's retreats?" he asked, voice low, eyes darting around like someone might be listening. "Yeah," I said. "Those ones." He didn't speak for a moment. Just picked up his coffee and took a long sip like he was trying to buy time. "I shouldn't be the one to talk about this," he finally muttered, but the words came out too fast, too defensive. I tilted my head and kept my voice even. "But you already did, remember? That night in the garage after your 4th gin and tonic. You told me Mom wasn't going to retreats. That she was with someone." He swallowed hard. "That was years ago. You were upset. I shouldn't have said anything. But it was true." He didn't deny it. Didn't look me in the eye either. I reached into my bag and turned off the voice memo app on my phone. He didn't notice I'd been recording until I slipped it back in. He looked at me then, really looked, like he was seeing me for the first time in years. Maybe ever. "You planning to blow this whole thing up, Tess?" "I'm not planning anything," I said. "I'm just remembering." Which is funny, since you all seem to think I never remember anything that matters. He pushed his plate away, suddenly not hungry. If Carla finds out about this, it'll destroy her. I nodded slowly, as if the idea had only just occurred to me. Good, I said. Maybe then we'll finally be even. When I got home that night, I listened to the recording twice. Uncle Dave's voice was shaky but clear, confirmation that our mother had spent a decent chunk of our childhood not at church events, but in a motel in the next county with a man who wasn't our father. A man who, as far as I could tell, disappeared just as quietly as he arrived, without a trace. Dad must have known, of course he did. He wasn't stupid. But he never said a word. He stayed, he cooked dinner, he helped with homework, and when he got sick, he made sure the mortgage was paid and that Mom had enough casseroles in the freezer to last a month. He didn't tell us what he knew. He didn't even tell me. But maybe that was his way of protecting us, or maybe just Carla. Because that was always the thing, Carla got the full version of everyone. The best stories. The biggest gestures. The benefit of every doubt. And I got the silence. But not anymore. The silence was finally mine to break. When Carla's name lit up my phone late Tuesday night, just after I'd climbed into bed and pulled the comforter up to my chest like armor, I knew without needing to answer that something had shifted, not in the loud, dramatic way people expect when a family finally starts to unravel, but in the slow, creeping fashion of hairline fractures spreading across old porcelain, subtle but inevitable and impossible to ignore once you've seen the first crack. I stared at the screen, the words, "Can I ask you something?" sitting there like a loaded gun, and after a moment, I unlocked the phone and replied with a single word, "Sure," because sometimes one word is enough to let someone know you're paying attention, but not enough to offer them safety. Her next message came fast, like she'd already been typing and just needed the go-ahead. "Why is Mom locked in her room crying?" I let it sit for a moment. Not because I didn't have an answer, but because the question itself revealed more than she realized, not only that something was wrong, but that, for once, it wasn't centered around Carla. Wasn't curated for her to manage or fix or feel superior about. Our mother, who prided herself on holding things together even as she left people out, who treated vulnerability like a weakness she could afford to show only when the spotlight was firmly on her, had finally folded inward, and the performance had stopped. I typed back slowly, "She probably just needs space." Carla sent a string of question marks, 3 in a row, which felt, in typical fashion, like an accusation rather than genuine concern. Then came the inevitable, "Did you say something to her?" This time, I didn't answer. Because what I had done, what I had set in motion, wasn't the kind of thing you could explain in a text message, or even a conversation, especially not with someone who'd spent her entire life believing that nothing bad ever really touched her, and that if it did, it must have been someone else's fault. The truth was, I had done something. And I'd done it without hesitation. That night after Easter dinner, after the dishes had been put away and the kids corralled into the car, after Carla and her husband had left and Mom had hugged me with the same distant, obligatory warmth she used for the postman or the woman at the pharmacy counter, I drove home on autopilot, the streets empty except for the occasional pair of headlights slicing through the dark. I didn't cry. I didn't fume. I didn't even listen to music. I just drove in silence, my hands steady on the wheel, my mind already sorting through the logistics, not of revenge, because that's not what I wanted, but of exposure, of truth, of finally allowing the walls to thin enough that someone might see the rot behind the paint. At home, I opened the second box from my closet, the one labeled Dad Stuff, though in truth it had always held more of Mom's ghosts than his, and pulled out the envelope tucked inside a faded yearbook. It was yellowed, creased at the corners, sealed with tape rather than glue, and inside was the motel receipt from 1998, along with 2 photographs I'd found years ago buried at the bottom of an old shoebox in Mom's dresser. Candid shots of her and a man I didn't recognize, taken on a picnic blanket somewhere unremarkable, her head resting on his shoulder, their fingers entwined like teenagers in love. My father had kept them, Whether out of forgiveness or cowardice, I never understood, and I had kept them after he died, because I couldn't bring myself to throw away proof that the version of my mother we had been sold wasn't the whole story. I printed a copy of the receipt, folded it carefully, and slipped it into a church donation envelope, one of the dozens she kept stacked near the door, then added a note, handwritten in black ink, small and simple. He knew. And he forgave you. But I didn't. The next morning, I drove back to her house. The neighborhood was still asleep, and the light in her bedroom was off. I left the envelope just outside her door, nestled between the morning newspaper and the potted tulips, and then I got back in my car and left. No confrontation. No big scene. Just the truth, finally placed at her feet. By that evening, according to Carla's frantic texts, Mom had locked herself in her room, refused dinner, and wouldn't speak to anyone. Carla tried calling her, then me, then left voicemails filled with the kind of performative worry she thought passed for love, the same way people clutch their pearls at funerals, but haven't called the deceased in years. She wanted answers. I gave her none. Instead, I sat down at my desk, opened my laptop, and clicked through folders until I found the file I hadn't looked at in more than a decade, a digital copy of a video transferred from an old camcorder tape, filmed by my father just a few weeks before he died. I remembered watching it once before, back when grief still made my hands shake and my heart feel like it might fall out of my chest. It had been too much then. Now, it felt like the missing piece in a puzzle that had long since revealed its image. In the video, my father sat on the edge of the bed in the guest room, his face pale, thinner than I remembered, his hands clasped together like he was afraid they might betray him by trembling. "I'm not going to talk long," he said, his voice raspy but calm, "because if I start talking about everything I know, everything I've chosen not to say, I might not stop. And the truth is, some of it isn't mine to say. But to you, Tess, I just want you to know I saw you. I always saw you. I saw how you were pushed aside, how you swallowed things Carla never had to taste, how you took on the quiet burdens no one even noticed existed. I'm proud of you. Even if your mother couldn't say it, even if your sister never understood it, I'm proud of the woman you became." He paused then, looked down at his hands, then back at the camera. "And if you're ever in doubt, remember that silence isn't kindness. It's just fear in a prettier dress." I stopped the video, sat there staring at the screen, the cursor blinking like a heartbeat. Carla texted again, "I'm coming over tomorrow. I want to talk face to face." And I, finally tired of hiding, replied, "Good. I have something to show you." Then I stood up, walked back to my closet, and pulled out the original camcorder tape, still in its dusty plastic case, and laid it on the table next to the motel receipt. Let her come. Let her ask. Let her finally see what I had been seeing my entire life. Carla arrived exactly on time, as if punctuality could lend her moral ground, as if walking through my door with perfect posture and that polished little tote bag of hers would somehow shift the narrative back to her advantage. Like this was just another PTA disagreement or a miscommunication about birthday plans, something neat, solvable, forgettable, tucked back into the linen drawer once it was over. She didn't knock more than once. She stood there, composed but not calm, like someone playing the role of concerned sister, but not quite able to commit to the emotional tone. And when I opened the door and looked at her face, tight-lipped, eyebrows slightly lifted in that way she always did when she was trying to appear above it all, I knew instantly that whatever happened in the next hour would not be a conversation. It would be a reckoning. She stepped inside without waiting for me to invite her, like she always had, like this space wasn't mine to control, and before she even sat down, she asked it blunt, sharp, no build-up. "What did you do to Mom?" It was a fascinating choice of words. Not "what happened," or "why is she upset," but "what did you do to her," as if she were already preparing to assign blame, to cast me in the role I'd been shoved into since childhood, the disruptor, the difficult one, the source of all unnecessary waves. I watched her lower herself into the chair across from mine, crossing her legs at the ankle like a goddamn anchorwoman, and for a moment, I said nothing. I just let the silence stretch until it got uncomfortable, until she started tapping her fingernail against the handle of her coffee mug, a small tick she probably didn't even notice. Then I stood, walked over to the sideboard, and retrieved the old camcorder tape, not the digital file, not the cleaned-up version, but the dusty, plastic artifact of a memory that had survived decades in a box that no one bothered to ask about. I placed it on the table in front of her like a sealed indictment and sat back down. "What is that?" she asked, although I think she already knew. "It's from Dad," I said, and when her face shifted, not surprise, but caution, I knew she had some idea of what it might contain. "I found it a few months after the funeral," I continued, "buried in the back of his desk drawer, wrapped in one of those old plaid scarves he used to wear on cold mornings. He must have recorded it near the end, when we were both busy pretending everything was fine and you were in Arizona for a conference." She blinked hard at that, but didn't interrupt. "I couldn't watch it back then," I added. "I wasn't ready. But I kept it. And then, after Easter, after Mom's little speech about how grateful she was to have a daughter like you, and only you, I watched it. And now you're going to watch it too." Carla didn't move at first. She just stared at the tape like it might bite her. Finally, she reached for it, but I stopped her hand midair. "Not yet," I said. "Because before you watch it, I want you to hear something. I want you to understand why this matters." She leaned back slightly, her face drawn, defensive. "You think I've had it easy?" she snapped. "You think being the one everyone leans on is a prize?" "No," I said. "I think it's a shield. One you've used so often, you forgot there's a person behind it. I think every time someone hurt me and I tried to tell you, you said I was too sensitive. Every time Mom overlooked me and I said it stung, you told me not to take things so personally. And every time I did something good, you reminded me not to make a big deal out of it. Because God forbid I disrupt the perfect little story where you're the glue and I'm just the one who makes things awkward." She opened her mouth, but I wasn't done. "You want to know what I did to Mom?" I told her the truth. The one Dad carried to his grave and I carried in silence for far too long. I reminded her that love without accountability isn't love, it's comfort dressed up in forgiveness, and she's been wrapped in it for decades while you handed her the blanket. Carla's eyes glistened then, not quite crying but close, and I saw it, the first crack in the polished exterior. She looked smaller than usual, not in body but in presence, like she'd finally been forced to stand without the scaffolding of her good daughter mythology. "She's not going to recover from this," she said quietly, and for a moment, I almost felt the old tug, the instinct to soften, to apologize, to reach across and make her feel better, the way I always had. But I let it pass. "Maybe not," I replied. "But I didn't break her. I just stopped pretending she wasn't already cracked." She looked down, fingers fiddling with the edge of her sleeve. "Are you planning to show this to anyone else?" she asked after a long pause. I stared at her, measured my breath, and answered with a calmness I hadn't felt in years. "I already did." She blinked. "What do you mean?" "I uploaded it," I said. "The part about Dad. The part where he says he knew. I sent it to the church women's group chat she's always bragging about. The one where she plays spiritual matriarch and passes around scripture like it's baked goods." Carla looked stunned, like the air had been knocked out of her, and maybe for the first time in our entire lives, she had nothing clever to say. "She lied," I said, "for years. To you, to me, to Dad, to everyone. And no one ever held her accountable. No one ever said, 'Wait a minute, this story doesn't make sense.' They just nodded along and handed her another slice of grace." Carla shook her head slowly. "Why now, Tessa? Why not just let it be in the past?" I smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "Because I've spent my whole life living in the past, Carla. And no one ever noticed. You all just assumed I was fine in the background. But now? Now I'm front and center. And I think it's time you saw what that looks like." She didn't say goodbye when she left. She just stood, picked up her bag, and walked out, the way people do when they can't decide if they've been insulted or enlightened. I stayed at the table long after the door shut, watching the camcorder tape turn slowly in my hand, wondering if this rupture, this mess, was what peace was supposed to feel like. And the strangest part? It didn't feel bad at all. 3 days passed without another word from Carla, and while that silence might have unsettled someone who still harbored the illusion that families always find a way back to one another, it didn't shake me in the slightest. Not because I was numb, and certainly not because I didn't care, but because for the first time in my adult life, I wasn't waiting for someone else's approval to justify my version of the truth. In the stillness of those days, there was a clarity I hadn't expected, a strange calm that settled over my home like the scent of rain after weeks of heat, not necessarily pleasant, but unmistakably clean. Like something had been scrubbed down to the bones and finally left to breathe. The mornings took on a different rhythm. I poured my coffee without distraction, no longer reaching for my phone out of habit, no longer anticipating a new demand or a veiled guilt trip disguised as a check-in. I walked without music, letting my thoughts stretch out like limbs too long folded, and with each step through the quiet neighborhood streets, past the neatly trimmed hedges and the houses that all looked vaguely similar in the way that comfort often does, I realized that I didn't miss the noise, not the forced laughter, not the obligation to perform small pleasantries, and certainly not the constant, draining awareness that I was always one sentence away from being misunderstood. The message finally came on a Thursday evening, just after the sun had dipped low enough to cast long shadows across my living room wall, that golden hour where everything looks like it's trying to forgive itself for what the day became. It was from my mother. Not a call. Just a voicemail, 64 seconds long, her voice hoarse and slower than I'd ever heard it, like every word had to crawl past 1,000 unspoken regrets before it could land. "I don't know," she began, and already, I felt the weight of what was coming, if you're waiting for me to say something clever or apologetic or righteous, because honestly, Tess, I'm not sure I know what that would even sound like anymore. There was a pause, and I imagined her sitting on the edge of her bed, staring out the same window that had overlooked our backyard for 30 years, the blinds drawn just enough to keep the neighbors out, her slippers still on, though she hadn't left the house in days. "I think part of me always knew you'd turn around one day and hold up a mirror," she continued, her voice thinner now, "but I never expected you'd do it with this kind of precision. You didn't scream, you didn't throw anything, you didn't storm out, you just laid the truth down like it had always been sitting on the table and none of us were brave enough to lift the cloth. And maybe that's what hurts most." She cleared her throat, and for a second I thought the message had ended, but then she spoke again, softer now. "I didn't hate you, Tessa. I just didn't know how to see you without seeing all the pieces of myself I tried to bury. And you made it hard to forget. You made it hard to pretend. I loved you, I love you, but not the way you needed, and I'm so damn sorry for that." There was another pause, longer this time, filled only with breath and the faintest sound of what might have been a door creaking in the background. "I don't know if I can come back from this," she said finally, and then the message ended. I didn't listen to it again. I didn't need to. Every word settled into me with the heaviness of finality, not quite closure, but something close enough to carry. Later that night, while brushing my teeth, I stared at my reflection in the bathroom mirror and realized that for the first time in years, I didn't look tired. Not in the way I used to, not in the soul-heavy, silence-swallowing way that made even smiles feel like performances. There were lines on my face, sure, earned from time and from grief and from years of holding in what should have been spoken, but there was also steadiness now. A stillness behind the eyes. Like the girl I used to be had finally stopped knocking from the inside. A few days later, I got an email from the church, not from Mom, not even from one of the women she always gossiped with during bake sales, but from the administrative assistant, a woman I'd met maybe twice. The message was brief. "Your mother has taken a leave from all committee duties. We hope she finds peace and clarity. Thank you for your contribution." Contribution. I almost laughed. The truth had been labeled a contribution, something offered, like a donation or a casserole, something given and then quietly accepted, even if it upset the table. It was a strange feeling, realizing that I had no idea what came next. The roles had been stripped bare, the stories untangled, and yet there was no neat resolution, no ceremonial forgiveness, no final scene where we all stood in a circle and cried and declared that love conquers all. That wasn't real life. That wasn't my life. And maybe the most honest part of this whole mess was accepting that sometimes families don't end with explosions or estrangements. Sometimes they just shift so completely that the version you remember doesn't exist anymore. And all that's left is the memory of a room down the hall, door shut, someone crying on the other side while the rest of the house goes on, pretending it doesn't hear a thing. A week after the voicemail, I ran into Carla's youngest at the grocery store, a chance encounter in the cereal aisle, just me and her and a box of Cheerios halfway to the cart. She smiled at me in that innocent, uncertain way kids do when they're trying to figure out if the adult in front of them is a safe one. "Aunt Tessa," she said, her voice small. "Mom said we're making a family tree for school. But she said we're putting you over on the side." I crouched down, looked her in the eyes, and nodded. "That's okay," I told her. "Some roots grow sideways. But they still hold the tree up." She blinked, smiled, and went back to browsing cereal like we hadn't just rewritten 3 generations in a sentence. I stood up, pushed my cart forward, and let her go. And that was how it ended, not with a bang, not with a resolution, but with the quiet certainty that for once, I had said what needed to be said, and I had done it not with rage, not with fire, but with the kind of cold, deliberate honesty that doesn't ask for applause, only acknowledgement. There will be no reunion photo, no smiling holiday card with all of us posed on a porch like nothing happened. But that's fine. Sometimes, the most powerful kind of love is the one that stops lying. And sometimes, being seen too late is still better than never being seen at all.